Hi, welcome everyone. We want to take the next step, the next topic, which is the project risk management. So as promised earlier, we'll try to keep it more condensed so that you have the time to run through it quickly and also to attend to the workshop questions, as well as to read around, okay? Just try to read around the recommended texts. You will not find this typically in the CMAT text, okay? You'll find it more from project management professional handbooks, okay? So the import of this topic or the import of the ERM module overall is to ensure that we get it professionally right from the onset. So everything we're doing here is more tailored to the professional body. So we are picking bits and pieces and condensing them together into one complete material. That's why you're finding the project risk management topic or section coming from purely PMP professionals dimensions. Okay, so that's what we'll be taking. You can also get this, like I said, from one of the recommended texts, specifically the second edition of Chapman's books, Chapman's book, yes. So that's it. We just launch into the study, and then we move on to the next step. So I'll share my screen once again. If you have any questions, get in touch with myself or with David, and we'll always ensure we get you what you need. Okay, so the first step to look at is the learning objectives. Okay, at the end of this, what we want to know, we want to understand the meaning, the components of project management. Okay, identifying any threats and risks which are associated with new projects or with most existing projects, but the focus is more on new projects. The focus is more on new projects. We'll also look at the uncertainties and variabilities associated with any project, and look at the causes. What drives these uncertainties? Normally, we term the 6 W's. Okay, the who, what, which way, when. We'll look at it. Okay. Then also look at the 4 main phases of the project life cycle, the PLC, and then the 8 inherent stages within the PLC. And of course, we must always have a formal risk management process, the RMP, and there should be some motivations, some reasons why we are undertaking a formal RMP, and also look at any benefits associated with adopting a formal RMP. Then of course, we look at the detailed risk and risk management practices, risk roles, which are associated with each of the 8 stages of the project life cycle. And also we quickly look at efficient and effective risk management associated with project management. All right. So overall, what do we need to understand? We should always know that for every project, whether existing or new ones, there will always be some elements of risk and uncertainty. So for us to be able to ensure that the project runs smoothly and efficiently, the organization must always plug in some practical systems to manage and define the success of these projects. Now, when we see that the project is not working as we had planned, then we know that there are some drawbacks. Therefore, we need to see how best we can resolve these drawbacks. The technical definition of project from Turner, 1992, states that it is any endeavor in which human, material, and financial resources are organized in a novel way to undertake a unique scope of work given the work specifications within constraints of time and cost, so as to achieve unitary beneficial change through the delivery of quantified and qualitative objectives. So at the end of the day, projects in its entirety should give us not just the quantified benefits, but any inherent intrinsic benefit should be felt. Okay. So at the end of the day, we shouldn't just look at examining a project from its cost benefits in terms of monetary, but what about any qualitative benefits? So if you take a look at the workshop question, the first question is looking at typically cost, financial, quantitatives. But if you drill down, the other questions look at other benefits, okay? Sustainability, you see a question inherently, we are looking at the sustainability benefits of undertaking an environmentally friendly project. So any projects in its entirety, considering it holistically, should be in such a way that it gives both quantified and both non-numerical benefits. So look at this definition and you see some key points I mentioned there. The change-inducing nature of projects. Projects should bring about changes. Okay, it shouldn't be just stated or just implemented without solving any real lifetime issues. There's always the need to ensure that the resources, the financial, the human, the material are organized within some significant constraints. We should organize them in such a way that when we are implementing them, when we are using them, they will be within what we have said, the target that we've set. Also, the central role of objectives in project management is mentioned. What is the central role? The central role is to bring about unitary change, okay, beneficial change to the system, to the organization, to the individuals who are undertaking it. Also, there is always some level of uncertainty in project management to every organization. Look at the unique scope of work, which requires attention as a central part of effective project management. So the project we're undertaking shouldn't be generic. It should be specific. It should be unique in each way, such that everybody knows that this project comes about to effect a particular change, okay? Even if we are modifying an existing project, the intent is that it should bring about some higher, some materially significant change. I think I'm using tautology to say materially significant, to bring about any significant change such that the old and existing one could not give us, okay? So it could be, it may necessarily not be the financial benefit to the company. Sometimes the company will lose, but the system will gain. And that is one of the key objectives of any project which are being undertaken from Turner's definition. Now, like I said, risk are always associated with threats, okay? With threats. If the risk will materialize into any harm or damage to the organization, that becomes a threat, okay? So we should always ensure that the risk associated with the project do not materialize to threats. But of course, what if the threats happen? What do we do, okay? So taking a simplistic approach without coordinating, without planning, without considering any controls, definitely will lead to project failures, in which case the risk could materialize into threats, okay? Therefore, for every organization to ensure that they are gaining the quantitative and the qualitative benefits of the project from the definition, then they must undertake some detailed approach to ensure that the risks are minimized, the threats are eliminated, okay? Now, in order to be able to decide these courses of actions, once we are working on reducing or getting rid of the threats, indirectly, we are creating opportunities for ourselves as a company. And these opportunities must be managed, must be capitalized upon. So a key focus on one should never be allowed to eliminate concern for the other. So we shouldn't capitalize or focus so much attention on the opportunities and forget about the threats. And the good thing is that, like I said, once you are getting rid of the threats, you are indirectly creating opportunities for the company. They are interrelated. Opportunities and threats are interrelated. They are like two sides of the coin. And one is more or less the mirror image of the other. They are not independent, okay? They are not independent, mutually exclusive. They have some lengths, okay? So resolve this and you gain from that. Leave this one to grow and you are going to lose on the other side, okay? So that's it. Now, uncertainties associated with project management and to all other project life cycles, especially in the early stages of the life cycles, are into 5 different categories, okay? That's what we're going to look at. So the scope should include clarifying what are we going to do, deciding what is to be done, and ensuring that we get it done, okay, for any project, okay? So the objectives, what do we want to achieve? How do we want to go about it? And let's work through to ensure you get it done. Take any example, any example of an activity you want to undertake. You want to learn how to drive. That's the objective. How do I do it? I learn, I study on my own to go and write a theory test, book appointments to get practical lessons. And then I took for my practical exams, go for it and pass. Make sure you get it done one step at a time, but ensure that you clearly clarify what you want to do. I will devote 5 hours every week to study. I will ensure I get some 2 hours every week to go for the practical lessons, okay? Now, uncertainty, more or less, is the same as variability in relation to the performance measures. So the cost, what cost are we going to include? The quality, what standard we want to meet? Is there any lack of clarity, detailed data? Don't we have any data to help us run through this particular project? Do we have the structures or there are no structures? Any known sources of bias and any unknown sources of bias? Is there any ignorance on the part of the parties who are implementing this? So these uncertainties normally characterize every project. You want to run a delivery service. You've never gone into that area before, for sure. You know that there will be lack of data if you've not done your research to know that the delivery services require X and Y resources. If you don't have clarity in terms of what registration you are supposed to undertake, because I cannot just get up, use my van and start undertaking delivery service. You need to get registered, you need to get approved by the council, okay, to ensure that this person is safe enough to be engaged in these delivery services, not to become a threat to the household. So quality of data, clarity of data, the detailed structures being put in place, known sources of biases, unknown sources of biases, ignorance could pose threats to the particular project that you are undertaking. So like I said, 5 typical stages in every product or project life cycle. And these are normally associated with estimates, okay, the basis of the estimate itself, about the design of the project and logistics that will be used. And then objectives, clarity about objectives and priorities that needs to be set. And then any fundamental relationship between the parties who will be engaged in implementing the project. Okay, let's take this one after the other. Okay, now what about the estimate? It deals with those uncertainties surrounding the cost, the duration that we will use to finish the project, and the quality measures. If there are uncertainties surrounding this, then you know that there could be some risk associated with the project, okay? And how do these arise? It could arise when there's no clarity in terms of what is required to be done, when there is lack of experience about that particular activity, when the activity we are undertaking has some form of complexities in terms of factors and other interdependent variables that could impact the project, okay? And also when we have limited analysis of the project we want to undertake, and also possible occurrence of particular events that is outside of our control, which might affect the project. So these, when, for example, you want to build a house, that's a project you want to start, the cost, if you don't know much about building, you need to find out. So the cost itself could also change because building materials prices could change. The time that you thought you could use 7 months to build, then COVID strikes. That's an event outside your control, which affects, you have to get, you have to go into lockdown, you don't get the artisans, the masons, you don't get the clearance on time from the council to be able to build. So these are elements that could cause uncertainties or variability with the estimate. What about the basis of the estimate? So they normally depend on who produced these estimates. Is it qualified? What form are they in? Are they just some typical narratives or quantitatives or a blend of both? Okay. And why, how, and when were they produced? Were they produced specifically for this project, or they copied it from a similar project and gave it to us? And from which resources and experience base were they collated from? And what assumptions underpin these estimates that are being given to you? So once again, you want to build a house, you have the estimate. What is the basis of that 10,000 cost they've assigned to electrical charges? Who prepared them? Is the person qualified enough? What assumption is the person making based on those costs and the time frames, okay? So it's always important that all assumptions about resources, about resources, about choices that we make, the methods we use to operationalize these projects must be clarified. Very important to clarify all these assumptions. So that when, as a project manager, you are no longer in the business, in the company, and you leave the scene, and someone comes to take over, this person can work through as if he's the one who started the whole project, okay? So Chapman and Ward in 2002, their publication said, they mentioned this, that most of the time estimates ignore or they assume away the existence of uncertainty that relates to three basic sources: known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and bias. Okay, so we normally will ignore known unknowns, uncertainties that we know will happen. We write it off. And then uncertainties we don't know, we write it off. And sometimes also we write off biases. Be careful, somebody who is preparing the estimate for you, if you are not the one who prepared it, even if you are the one who prepared it, make sure you clarify these uncertainties so that anyone who takes over the project, even if you are not there, or anyone who is reviewing your work, should be able to justify or give a good basis upon which you are taking those decisions. All right. Third one, variability about design and logistics. In the conception stage of the project life cycle, the nature of the project deliverables are very important. So the design of the project, the deliverables, the logistics we will need to use in getting this must be clearly stated, okay? Now, much of this uncertainty is removed in pre-execution stages of the project life cycle, the conception, the early stages. Why? Because we try to specify what is to be done, how it is to be done, when it must be done, who does it, and at what cost. Once we are able to remove these uncertainties, then for sure we know the design will work perfectly for us. So prior to even executing, implementing the project, we must always specify these caveats so that anyone who proceeds with implementing the project will ensure that it works according to set lines, set timelines, and logistics. In practice, significant amounts of uncertainties may remain unresolved throughout the life of the project life cycle, especially when we have a project which is dynamic in nature, which can be affected by any external or internal events, regardless of what we do. There will always be some uncertainties until we have finished, unless it happens in such a way that this is a project which is which has a repetitive nature. We've done the same thing in the past, the same building, the same style, the same structure. We're going to build the same building, the same structure, especially in the real estate where they are building same design of houses. Then for sure, the uncertainties will be reduced, okay? Now, what about the logistics that we need? The nature of these logistics. What assumptions underlie the logistics, the resources, okay? And any associated uncertainties that may drive these bases of estimates. We must always clarify these assumptions. Again, the objectives, the priorities. It is always difficult sometimes when we are not too sure about the project objectives. It means we are more or less working in the dark. You're just working without having a clear-cut objectives ahead of you. So it is always important for us to always specify our objectives. If it is necessary, we should trade off. We should just write off. There's always opportunity cost in any project, okay? And those trade-offs sometimes are acceptable trade-offs, okay? These difficulties becomes complex if the uncertainty extends to the objectives and motives of different project parties, and trade-offs are prepared. Trade-offs parties are prepared to make between the objectives. So once we are not able to clarify this and we allow these uncertainties to move into even the detailed outputs that we are looking out for. For example, if you have a detailed implementation plan, the overall aim has been set that to build 17 townhouses in the middle of the city for mortgage purposes. The specifics must be stated, how many units, how many types, the 2 bedrooms or single beds or whichever. If these limited specific objectives are not clarified and also made aware, or we make we don't make the stakeholders aware of these specific objectives, then for sure, we'll be working in the dark, okay? The key issue is that, do all parties understand what we are doing? Do they have the same expectations? The ones who are giving us the loan to build these townhouses, the masons, the carpenters, the artisans who are going to work on this, do they all understand the kind of terms that we have specified, the objectives and that we have set for this project? If they don't, then of course the project could be doomed, okay? Now, to ensure that we have a successful implementation, the roles must be integrated. Everyone must be able to understand the rules that we have set, okay? Specific rules must be set for everyone to ensure that we hit our target. And then the fifth one about fundamental relationship between the project parties. Clarify who does what, so that we will not overlap in terms of functions, and it shouldn't also occur that one person is usurping somebody's role or responsibilities. You will always have multiple parties engaged in project management. And so for us to ensure that there's no ambiguity in respect of roles and responsibilities, we must clarify who does what, okay? We must also set out clearly the communication lines, the parties, specify their roles in terms of, and you should always enshrine this in the form of contractual obligations, clear-cut contract terms and conditions, so that everyone will be able to understand what I'm doing, whom I'm reporting to, who reports to me, and what kind of mechanism I need to use in terms of coordinating and controlling the communication lines, okay? So ambiguity about roles and responsibilities can be crucial. It can crash the project that we are doing, so it must be systematically addressed in any project. Okay, assumptions underlying any contractual relationship must be clearly stated so that we all understand the kind of objectives we are meeting, because it has more or less a rippling effect. If person A doesn't do his work well and person B depends on person A to do his work, then it means for sure, if garbage in, garbage out, you give me a garbage, that's what I will use to proceed with my work. So especially when we have interdependent relationships, okay? Now, what causes these 5 uncertainties? We call them the 6 Ws, okay? So usually these 6 Ws has to do with who does what, the parties, the project initiators, who are the parties involved. If we don't clarify who does what, then these uncertainties will occur. Why are they doing what they are doing? What do they want to achieve? What is the motive? Is it for profit? Is it for sustainability? If these are not clarified, then for sure there could be some uncertainties and risk associated with the project. What are they interested in? What are they doing? The design, the physical product, the service, the process, we must clarify that as well. And which way? The activities, the design, the structures, how is it to be done? And then the wherewithal, the resources we would need to implement. Which resources do we need? Is it just financial, or we need human and materials? And then we need to look at the schedule, the timetable. When should we get it done? Once we are able to resolve the root causes, these root causes, then we know for sure that the uncertainties will be reduced, if not totally cleared off. Of course, it's always difficult to clear off all the uncertainties in any project because times changes, things could change, okay? Systems are always dynamic and you will not be able to. So these are the 6 Ws that will normally impact or drive these failures, these project failures or these uncertainties and risks. Now the project life cycle has 4 phases, and inherent in the 4 phases, there are 8 stages. This will be our focus as we wrap up, we try to wrap up. So the 4 phases has to do with the formation or conceptualizing the project, and then the planning, and then the build up, implementation, the main program, the execution, and afterwards termination of phase out, okay? So like I said, 8 specific stages are inherent within these 4. Normally, most examinations or most professional bodies, and even in practice, are not much more interested in the phases. They are looking at the stages, okay? Because the stages are normally the integrity, they are the details, they are the ones that will drive the entire project, okay? So let's look at these phases together with the stages and try to understand what we mean, okay? Now, these defined phases helps the organization, the company, to factor in what we call a formal risk management process. So a formal risk management process will always have to be in place. They vary depending on the stage at which we are. Sometimes we have to modify it, sometimes we have to maintain it throughout, but it must be comprehensive enough to cater for all the 4 phases and all the 8 stages of the PLC. So in this project life cycle, you see that the first stage, the first phase, conceptualization phase, has the first stage, okay, which is conceive the project or a service or the process, whichever we're doing. The steps normally involved is to trigger the event, start the event, capture the concept, whether in documented form or in a recorded version, okay, clarify what you are going to do, and also the concept must be elaborate enough for us to be able to understand. Comprehensive, okay, and at the end of the day, try to evaluate the concept to see whether it makes sense. In the second phase, which is the planning phase, we have 3 stages. That is designing the product or the process or the service, and then plan how you want to execute it, which is the next stage, and then allocate resources equitably, reasonably, tactically. Now, what are the steps that normally goes into the planning phase? Design, okay, develop performance criteria, targets, resources, allocations, and also set out the detailed implementation plans. And again, try to evaluate these designs to see whether we need to use the same thing or we need to revise it, revamp it altogether to meet higher standards. The third phase is the execution, the implementation phase. So it has only one stage, which is execute or implement the production, or if it's a service or if it's a process, implementing it. What are the steps involved? Coordinate and control. Ensure that they are being done within the structures we have set. Monitor progress. If there are deviations, respond to them. Okay. And then if there are any milestones which need to be modified, modify them. And then control. Always compare your performance against targets and see if there are variances. Revise them, okay, and start all over again if there's the need to. Then the final phase, which is the termination phase, after we've implemented, we have to run it down. We have to restore the system, okay? It has 3 stages. 1, we deliver the product to those who need it, to the customers, to the system. We review the process to look out for any areas which requires revisions, okay? And support the project, the product. After sales support, you fix the road. You realize there will be potholes after some time. Come and fix it, okay? Now, what are the steps involved? Verify your deliverables. Have we met them? If we haven't met all of them, if there are some deliverables which need to be modified, modify them, okay? If there are some performance criteria which are too high, which are archaic, modify those performance criteria, okay? Review any development and evaluation, okay, and also provide some after sales support, after production support, and evaluate your support that you provide to them, the criteria. Does it make sense? Okay, do we have to still provide the same support, or we need to revamp or revise it? And of course, maintain some basic maintenance procedures, and also put in place liability perceptions. Try to indemnify yourself from any future losses that may occur, all right? These are the phases. These are the stages, and these are the steps involved, okay? Now, what is the motivation? Like I said, once we have these phases, we need to put in place a comprehensive formal risk management process, the RMP, a formal one, okay, documented. But why do we want to do this? Why do we want to put in a formal ERM, whether a formal RMP? Why do we want to do this? Is there any motivation? Is there any reason behind? Yes, there are. There are, whether you are modifying the RMP or you are using the same formal RMP. One of the reasons, the motivation is for documentation purposes. For any effective project management, we must have documentation of all the basic and common reasons underlying the project. Documents must be detailed enough. Don't make it simple, so that once it is detailed, we can eliminate any areas of ambiguities in the project. We promote clearer communication between all the parties. And of course, the documentation of the RMP, the formal RMP system, helps us to serve as a point of reference, a point where we can go to and learn. a knowledge database, okay? It also becomes a database where we can collect data and use it for analysis in future. So documentation moves us to institute a formal RMP. Again, it serves as a basis for analysis. It helps us, like, since it's a database where it helps us to get data for collection, for analysis. It helps us to also run analysis because that's where we get the data. What analysis are we running? Quantitative or qualitative or both? So the formal RMP helps us to undertake this kind of analysis at each stage of the or phase of the PLC. Now it helps us to be able to identify who is responsible for what, and also interpret it to those who want to understand it. Now, many of these key motives for formal risk analysis may be driven by quantitative risk analysis. People are always looking at the money, the cash, the monetary, okay, the figures, and not the qualitative. But the qualitative should not be forgotten. They also play a key role, because if you're going to just build a house and thinking of the profits you make without considering the nuisance that it will pose to the environment, because it's going to destroy some farmlands, deforest some areas, and you are not considering the effect it will have on the community, then of course, you know, you are not being a good citizen. So consider both the qualitative, the quantitative, clarify who does what, who would it affect, okay, so that the system, the project meets required standards and not get yourself into trouble. Again, the motives for adopting a formal RMP is to help us to set targets, set our expectations, and commit to the project, okay? So always ask yourself, what are the targets that we are aspiring to achieve? Okay, what are expected values that we want to get? And then what are the outcomes? This will also help us to commit resources. Okay, so targets, expected values, and commitment needs to be distinguished clearly. Once we have this in place, it shouldn't just be in our head. We should document it clearly in a formal RMP system. And this will help us to distinguish in terms of cost involved in meeting the targets, time involved in getting to these expectations, and all resources we need to commit. So a formal RMP is important, the motivation. Again, risk efficiency comes in as usual. The central reason that we want to deploy a formal RMP is to ensure that our risk is efficient enough to safeguard the success of the project. So it is by far the most difficult motive to understand, but it is also by far the most important. Because any project you're undertaking, you don't want to run the risk of failure. So the risk efficiency is important. That's why we need to institute a risk management, a formal RMP system process to ensure that we have documented everything, okay? Now there's one important thing in this, I want to read it out. It says, the central reason why risk management process should not be seen as an add-on. Sometimes we just see it as an addendum, okay? Just adding up to the numbers, an overhead, some limited focus on questions like, is this project worth investing in? No, we should actually consider it as an integral adding, a heart of the project, okay? This is what should drive us. And we should always ask whether it is always worthwhile. It shouldn't just be a one-off question. It should always be a question which should drive every phase, every stage of the project, okay? The reason why we want to plug in a risk efficiency system, which is which should be inherent in the formal RMP, is that it helps us to diagnose desirable changes in plans, helps us to demonstrate the need for such changes, and also helps in facilitating, demonstrating, and encouraging enlightened caution. What is enlightened caution? We'll come to another term, which is enlightened gambling, okay? Enlightened caution is simply our willingness to commit resources, both materials, human, financial, okay, time, that may not be needed because on average in expected value terms, it will be cost effective to commit such resources, okay? That's enlightened caution. Now, the final item, another motive for adopting a formal RMP is the trade-off between risk and expected performance. There will always be risk associated with any project we undertake, but should we always look at the risk, or should we always try to find avenues to make trade-offs between alternative risk-efficient project plans. This is what we need to always consider. So the RMP will help us to assess areas where we can possibly trade off some risk and expected outcomes, expected performance, okay? But what happens in real life is that if you want to trade off some risks, then you need to always try to be prepared to lose something, okay? Because risk almost one runs with returns, okay? So return for the moment to the assumption that expected costs and associated costs are adequate measures. So if you want to cut off some risk, you should be prepared to invest some more, or should be prepared to sacrifice some performance values or expected values or some profits, let me put it that way. Now, for most risk-efficient plans, the level of cost risk can be decreased, given an increase in expected cost, and the level of expected cost can be decreased, given an increase in cost risk. Okay, so always a two-way system. You give and take, trade off some risk, and make sure you also boost some performance or expected performance, or try to make sure you plug in some systems that would ensure that if I lose off some risk, what happens to the other side? Will I still get the return I'm expecting? Okay, it's a give and take. So that's why it's always important to undertake a detailed risk analysis, so that once you are trading off some risk and expected return, you realize that you don't lose too much, okay? You don't lose too much. You can always at least run the risk of breaking even, if for nothing at all, okay? Now, two almost, but not quite directly analogous to those associated with risk efficiency. And there's also a third, somewhat different but complementary reasons why we want to always do this trade-off between the risk and expected performance. One, helping us to diagnose possible, again, desirable changes in plans, demonstrating the implications of such changes, and it helps us to demonstrate, facilitate, and also encourage enlightened gamble. What is enlightened gamble? Simply the risk-efficient gambles involving significant risk that is considered bearable. So we accept such risks in our project, okay? We accept such risks. So the trade-offs may not also always be the fact that we have to knock it off. Sometimes we want to accept some risk because we think, if I can tolerate this, you remember the Tara concept. If I can accept this risk and it can boost my performance, it can increase my returns, I go for it. Okay, I go for it. Enlightened gamble. Let me gamble and let me see that this risk, I can bear it. Because at the end of the day, when I bear this risk, I will not die. It will rather boost my income in the next 5-10 years. Motives for adopting a formal RMP helps us to also gain some benefits, some advantages, several advantages you can think of in the project life cycle. But let's pick only 5. One, it stimulates effective integration of design, plan, cost considerations, the design of the project, the planning of the project, the cost considerations of the project. It helps us to piece all of them together. It also helps in facilitating consideration of parties, objectives, design, activities, linkages. So it helps us once again, to piece together who is doing what objectives are we trying to achieve, what are the priorities, how have we designed or set up the structures for this activity, for this work, and what are the activities we are going to do. We link all of them together, more or less like a matrix, a detailed implementation plan. It also helps us to focus more on the PLC stages and related product performance issues, and those areas which do not require much attention, we'll knock it off, we forget it. Again, the advantage is that it helps us to distinguish clearly between targets, expected commitment, expected values and commitment of the parties, who is doing what, with benefits in later stages clearly stated and set out, particularly in the delivery stage where we give it to customers, we deliver the project. And then 5th advantage is that it helps us to consider change processes which are necessary to help us manage expectations. All right. Now, as we move on to wrap up, in the 8 stages, as we saw in the PLC phases and then the stages, now these are generic. These are generic risk roles and analysis or risk management practices we can implement. So if you have a real case scenario, like if you take the tutorial question, the workshop question, I don't want to use tutorial, the workshop case study, we're asking you to identify specific real-time risk rules or risk management practices that can be infused within the design and planning stage of a new product, okay? So these are generic, okay? So for the conceiving or conceptual stage where we conceive the project, the RMPs normally would involve identifying the stakeholders and their expectations. So not just those with financial interest, those also non-financial interests, also trying to identify appropriate performance objectives. 2, in terms of the designing the product strategically, the RMPs or the risk rules will be testing how reliable the design of the project is, how feasible the design is, setting up benchmarks, performance criteria, standards you use to assess, and also trying to assess the cost of the design, the benefits of the design, and then any changes that we can put in place in the terms of the design. Cost-benefit analysis comes here. Okay. And then planning the execution strategically, we look at identifying and providing allowance for regulatory constraints. Okay. Assessing how feasible the plan is again. Okay. How feasibility of a plan, not the design. Okay. So at the design stage, we look at feasibility. At the planning stage, again, we look at the feasibility. And then we assess the duration of the plan, the cost of the plan, the milestones we are putting in place, okay? Milestones then come in the planning stage, not the design, okay? What resources do we want to plug in at the strategic level? Of course, it can trickle down to the managerial and then the operational level, but we always start from the top, higher, look at the bigger picture, assess the effect of the changes, any changes to the project on the plan. What would it be? Any levels of contingency we need to put in place? Would there be possible future contingent liabilities, contingent resources where we need to leverage on some key manpower? Also try to assess contracting strategy at an overview level. Now, the 4th stage, allocating resources tactically. You must estimate the required level of resources you need, the detailed level. Okay, whom are you going to contract? Who is going to provide which materials? What procurement strategies would you use? Any contractual term and conditions? Would you maintain the same supplier or you want a new supplier? Do you want to diversify the materials? Think wide, okay? Any risk sharing arrangements you want to put in place? Any implications for contractual conditions, okay? And any competitive tenders you want to consider? Also determine the appropriate target cost and bid prices for contract. So resources deals mostly with financial considerations, because at this stage it's all about money. Now execute, implement production. What are the execution issues you think are outstanding, which we need to identify? What are the implications of any changes to the design? At this stage, do we want to change the design or the plan, or do we want to modify it a little? What will be the implications in terms of execution? Do we have to revise the estimates on completion? Almost you are completing. Maybe some finishing touches. You want to revise the estimate. You also want to revise the time you think you can use in executing this. All right. And then 6, we look at deliver the product. We're giving it out to stakeholders, to customers. Okay, what are the issues in terms of delivery? Can we meet the schedule? Is it feasible? Can we meet the performance criteria expected of us by the users? Do we have to test this before we give it out? Of course, we need to. Do we have to plug in some discounts or some bonuses, something to induce the final user? Okay, any resources we think we need to use to polish it up finally before we give it out to who is going to use it, and any availability of commissioning facilities if necessary. Okay, then the last 2 stages, we review the process. How effective is the risk management strategies we put in place? How effective is it? Was it just paperwork or it really worked? Also, which resources did we use? How effective did these resources respond to our process that we implemented throughout? And finally, after we've done this, supporting the product. What are the extent of future liabilities? Could be contingent liabilities. Are there any appropriate levels of resources required? And is there any profits accruing from this project or we lost? Okay, finally, efficient and effective risk management. Just an overview, okay? We must always ensure that effectively we have achieved our aim, okay, and efficiently. Effectiveness, talking about how whether the risk management process has helped us to achieve our objectives. Effectiveness. Efficiency is talking about whether we've been able to do it within the set time, using a few to achieve more within the set time, okay? Doing the right thing, let me put it that way. So there are two things. So efficiency talks about doing things right. Efficiency, doing things right. And effectiveness deals with doing the right thing, okay? So there could be, it is quite extensive, very detailed in terms of achieving effective and efficient risk management processes. And there's this comprehensive RMP, which we term the shampoo. Shape it, harness everything, and manage project uncertainty. That's it, the shampoo approach, but we didn't go deep into this process. Here, it will help us to address all uncertainties, whether about estimates, about targets and commitments and deliverables, okay? It helps us to deal with all of this, and it takes a whole project lifecycle perspective into place, and there's a detailed issues it considers at each stage, okay? Now, we must always undertake this RMP. It comes with costs, but the benefits at the end of the day should outweigh the costs. So do always a cost-effective analysis and try to see which one works. Remember, in project management, it's not simply about trying to cut down costs, economize the resources. No, it helps, but that's not, shouldn't be the paramount idea. It is about doing the right thing, doing things right and doing the right thing, regardless of whether we will be able to achieve, regardless of whether we'll be able to achieve our cash, our profitability targets or not. So here, the 3 E's do not normally play a role in terms of economy, but efficiency and effectiveness is what we need, okay? What is always appropriate in project management is to ensure that you have enough resources to operate an RMP. Said that it will be effective, it will be efficient within the time available, and we'll always be able to do what is desirable by adjusting time, by adjusting some resources, okay, at appropriate level, and to ensure that we can achieve this project in its right form and stature, okay? All right, that's it. So I'll keep it simple here. I've gone beyond the time I thought I would have done, but it's better to explain than to leave it for you to worry your head over. Okay, so that's it. So my next appeal is that take your time, look at the coursework. There are some things that we don't or have not been able to plug in the slides, but I've intentionally plugged it in the coursework, in the case study, so that indirectly what we don't capture here, we capture it on the other hand. So it makes sense for all of us to be present in the workshop so that we can address any element which is not addressed in the discussion here. Thank you. See you all. Take care.